Let's move back to the markets right now. And one of the big questions, of course, is are the movements in the markets just a series of cycles? Our next guest does focus on that, using cycle analysis to predict movements in the markets, all of the markets. To tell us how investors can use this analysis to their advantage potentially, we're joined by David Gurwitz, Managing Director of Charles Nenner Research. David, good to be with you again. Thanks for joining us.
Catherine, thank you.
And David, it's interesting. Your clients are around the world. They're sovereign wealth funds, hedge funds. Talk to us a little bit about what you do for them.
Well,
from a cycle analysis.
we use a system developed by Dr. Charles Nenner while he was in medical school to calculate patterns from the past. And the word cycle comes from the Greek word circle. So we find top to tops in any data series. Therefore, Facebook hasn't been public enough for us to be able to do. We look back and find the patterns there, combine them, and use that to call tops. We have another algorithm that we use to call levels. It's been very successful.
Do you have to believe that history repeats itself?
Well, history repeats itself in patterns. The key is finding those patterns.
Okay.
That's what's not so easy.
Let's go through some of the key items that everybody's focused in on today in terms of where we go from here.
Right.
Crude oil for one. What's the pattern looking like?
Sure. I'll answer crude, and then as we go through each one, I'll frame it in a way to show, let's look at the past and then see where we're holding now.
Okay.
When Charles was on another show in America 5 years ago, crude was 147. He said we were going to have deflation. 6 months later, it went to 49. So we called the top then. Recently, we called the top of crude at 97, said it would go to the mid-40s, which it did. We went on a buy signal to 60, which it did. Starting to head down now. We're longer-term bullish. Might hit some resistance now. We believe that crude, I came early before, unusual for me, but I came early and I watched what you were discussing before, the bull case and the bear case. We don't think that's what runs the world. We think it's the repeating patterns that do, and then afterwards they'll say the bulls were correct or the bears were correct. So we think crude longer term will go back. And
to what?
Close to where it was.
Which
was approaching 100.
Okay.
But not right away. But
let me get this before we move on to the next one. But what's the downside in the price of crude, and when do we see a much stronger upside?
We think the 40s is the mid-40s is a possibility, but it's strong now. So we analyze it step by step. So we're still looking for the baseline here. We don't think it's going to go down to 20 like people think. Okay. At all.
Let's look at the Canadian dollar as well. I think the recent activity in the Canadian dollar, the strength that is, has probably surprised a lot of people. What do you think?
We've called for a strong dollar. Very often people think the Canadian dollar, because it's a commodity currency, has to always track crude. The reality is recently the Canadian dollar has been very much tracking what's going on with the pound. We think the Canadian dollar is going to be strong also, as it's been lately. And it's interesting, we called the euro to be strong, we called the Aussie to be strong, we called the pound to be strong, we called the Canadian to be strong. And this is after several years of strong dollar performance.
Are you expecting then that we've seen the peak in the strong U.S. dollar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Going back to the Canadian dollar for 1 second, then you say stronger. Some people who want a stronger dollar would say, well, what does that mean?
Well, we give levels in our report, which I welcome people to write in and get, but we will give you precise levels and targets, which I'd rather not do at the moment, but we will give exact levels where it's going to go, as we've done. I think there was a time...
But does stronger mean back to 90, or does it mean 84?
It could be both. Could be one step at a time. It could be there. The Canadian was 68 cents to the dollar about 5 years ago, if you remember.
Yep.
So was the Aussie. We said then they were both going to go to par. So it did, and we didn't know what the reasons were. We still don't know what the reasons are for anything other than the repeating patterns.
Okay, let's take a look at the TSX as well.
TSX.
So much focus on the U.S. markets being overvalued.
Right.
I've had some people lately tell me that the Canadian market is looking very attractive. What do you think?
Let me go through the past.
Okay.
Let me see now. When the TSX was 12,000, again, my parents got married in Kitchener, so I'm semi-Canadian, so I do look at this stuff. We said it was undervalued, would go to 14, and it did. At that point, we said get out, go to 13.5. We went long at 13.5 up to the low 15s where it is now. We think it's on a sell signal now, and while there's a small bounce coming, we think it's possible, highly possible, the TSX is down for the rest of the year.
Interesting.
We don't agree with that opinion you just mentioned.
Okay, that's a very, I think that's not a consensus call. Let's go to the last topic, though, that we've got to talk about. Fixed income bonds. What do you think here?
Okay, let's go back 60 years. Right?
60.
60.
Okay.
I'm 60. Let's go back there. 1952, rates were 2%. 30 years ago, rates were 17. Now they're 2. That's a cycle,
Okay.
right? So we think that's going to repeat. So we think longer term rates are going to go up and bonds are going to go down. And this 1% bond investment is a very crowded trade. We think a lot of people are going to lose a lot of money being long bonds.
When will they start to lose money?
Well, as soon as rates start to go up, not this week. So we think TLT, which is the bond fund, is a good buy. But we think within this year, if not by next year, we think rates will start to go up. And it's going to cause a lot of problems. And if you look back over the last 120 years, that same cycle's there. So it's nothing pretty much anybody can do about it.
Very interesting. David, great to see you and in Toronto in studio with us. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.